Thank you. My name is Tim. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you for having me. As I've said on other occasions, I don't know why I'm here, but I know that I am here. So I'm going to make best use of the fact that I'm here. If anything I say is useful, splendid, and if it isn't, don't worry about it. I'm not an authority on anything. So I'm going to read out the short form and the eye-wateringly long form of Tradition 9 first. So the short form, AA as such ought never be organised, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. Long form, each AA group needs the least possible organisation. Rotating leadership is the best. The small group may elect its secretary, the large group its rotating committee, and the groups of a large metropolitan area their central or intergroup committee, which often employs a full-time secretary. The trustees of the General Service Board are, in effect, our AA General Service Committee. They are the custodians of our AA tradition and the receivers of voluntary AA contributions by which we maintain our AA General Service Office at New York. They are authorized by the groups to handle our overall public relations, and they guarantee the integrity of our principal newspaper, the AA Grapevine. All such representatives are to be guided in the spirit of service, for true leaders in AA are but trusted and experienced servants of the whole. They derive no real authority from their titles, they do not govern. Universal respect is the key to their usefulness. And just a first preliminary comment. Someone shared at my home group a while ago, and okay, so even after 27 years in AA, I've still got hackles, and things can still get my hackles up. And what got my hackles up was the person saying, there are no leaders in AA. There absolutely are leaders, but they're not leaders in the ordinary sense. I just wanted to get that one out of the way, and we'll come to that in a bit. Another preliminary comment, my friend Tom says in the big book where it talks about I think it's in it's in the foreword to the first edition, or maybe it's the first preface. We're not an organization in the ordinary sense of the word, and he says that's one of the biggest understatements in AA, which I think is very good. So the motto that I try to follow with this in my life is as much organization as necessary, but as little as possible. And if you adopt those two principles, as much organization as necessary and as little as possible, then I think that's the general, if there were a slogan for Tradition 9, that would be it. By the way, everything that I'm saying, I've got from somewhere. I think I'm more of a magpie than anything, just collecting little shiny things that I've encountered over the years and then dropping them in your lap. So I've not derived anything myself. Everything has come from somewhere else. So if you don't like it, you can blame them, whoever they are. So organization here is very interesting. Sometimes people use this principle in an extended way to suggest that AA meetings ought to be completely chaotic, and anything but complete chaos is people being controlling. Now, that's not what this tradition, at least on the face of it, is about. I think as an extended principle, you can look at organization. How much does something need to be organized? I've been in meetings where I feel a little more organization wouldn't go amiss. For instance, the tea maker turning up half an hour before might be preferable to the tea maker turning up 2 minutes before with the wrong milk. A little organization can really help. I've been in I'm sure you've been in meetings too, where you look round and you're surprised that people aren't wearing SS uniforms. The whole thing seems so tightly taped down just in case anyone says something out of turn. And you know that people are scanning and monitoring everything. But what this tradition is about, as far as I can tell, in terms of what the tradition says about itself, it's about organization means structure, the structure of AA, the structure of a group, and the structure of AA. And it talks about the formation of committees, and this is the principal means in AA for uh, the group to grow into something greater. So if you remember biology, you'll remember how, single cell organisms divide, and well, this is the equivalent for AA. One of the forms of division is new groups get set up, but another form is this formation of a committee. And now it's terribly important, this distinction, and it's not one that's well understood. Is there are two different types of committee. The first one is, I'll give you an example. It's easier to explain by example. The first type of committee is where, let's say you've got 15 groups in an area and they want to have a telephone service and they want to do public information work. So they form a committee which is responsible to all of those originating groups, and you now have a structure with two layers, and then maybe the intergroups from different areas. I know you've got areas and districts or something in Australia. I never remember which way. I think the district is the more local one and the area is the bigger one. Okay, that's right. So groups form a district committee, the districts form an area committee, and then you end up with a conference. So the formation of the committee creates an extra layer in the structure. And that's the most common way in which committees are formed. And if we just look at how that operates at an intergroup level, the intergroup is delegated really rather a lot of, or the district is delegated rather a lot of authority and responsibility. So amongst themselves, all the groups are doing is sending delegates to the intergroup of the district. And then the delegates get together, the general service representatives, and they say, right, who's going to be our chair? Who's going to be our secretary? Who's going to be our treasurer? And amongst themselves, they appoint their officers. And the intergroup of the district is responsible back to the groups. But within the committee itself, the chair, and this is the important distinction, the chair is responsible to the intergroup. So it's the intergroup. I'm going to talk about intergroup. Whenever I say intergroup, just replace it with the word district for Australian purposes. Within the intergroup, the chair is primarily responsible to the intergroup, and then the intergroup is responsible back to the individual groups through the GSRs. Which means that if the intergroup doesn't like the chair, if the chair messes up, the intergroup gets rid of the chair. You've got a very different situation with so-called subcommittees. And I'll give you an example of how that works in London Region North, which is the region I am in. So the region puts on these service workshops, and a member of the region is appointed by the region as the chair of the subcommittee, and then he runs around and grabs people and appoints them and co-opts them to be on his little committee. but he's the little tin pot dictator of that committee. He's accountable not to the members of that committee, that subcommittee for the service workshop. He's accountable to the region which appointed him. Totally different setup. And where this, I'm going to cover this question because it's not strictly related to Tradition 9, except in as far as it relates to subcommittees. If there is dissent in an intergroup, the intergroup resolves the dissent. In a subcommittee, let's say there was a situation where a chair of a subcommittee to the region, so not an intergroup, not a district, it was a service workshop subcommittee. The chair had got all the volunteers in place, all the speakers, all the people running the workshop. And someone on the workshop tried to pull rank and shuffle some of the volunteers at the last minute, the presenters. And there, the chair of that subcommittee has the final decision and is able to override the members of that subcommittee, because he's responsible not to the subcommittee, but to the region that put him in that role in the first place. So you've got a fundamentally different structure and a fundamentally different chain of command there. And the other situation where you get that rather strange beast of the subcommittee, you'll have groups with subcommittees as well. So if a group has a public information subcommittee, it's the public information subcommittee isn't responsible to itself. It's responsible very, very directly to the group through the PI chair. You get it with the national subcommittees, which are appointed by the General Service Board. So the General Service Board, let's say I was on the national subcommittee for Armed Services Liaison. And we were appointed, the members of that subcommittee were appointed by the chair of that subcommittee, who was the board member. So again, it's a very, very different setup. The chair of the intergroup does not appoint the GSRs of the intergroup. That's why it's a different setup. Whereas with a national subcommittee or a group subcommittee, the chair of that subcommittee appoints the members of that committee. And absolutely, there can be a rigorous process which enables anyone who wants to volunteer for the post to volunteer for the post, to submit an AACV, you have to be interviewed for a national subcommittee by 2 of the board members, but it's very clear the board member is in charge. So it looks very, very democratic. If you sit on a national subcommittee, at least in Great Britain, it looks very democratic until push comes to shove, and then you discover that the board member is in charge. Because the board member is not responsible to us, the subcommittee, he's responsible to the board, and the board is responsible to the conference. And you can't have double-headed leadership. You can't have responsibility going in 2 directions. Otherwise, there's no way of resolving the conflict. So when I suggested something once which the board member didn't like, I won't go into details, he overrode me, and my only option was to say yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir, or resign. And you can express your minority view and all of that, but at the end of the day, I thought the board member was wrong. Now, it wasn't a hanging offence, so I didn't make a fuss. I just said yes sir, no sir, 3 bags full sir. But this important distinction between the 2 different types of committee. So to recap, there's a type of committee that creates an extra layer in the structure, an extra row of the pyramid. And there are other ones which are like bubbles, where there's one person who's in charge who's got a bunch of little volunteers helping them. Totally different setups. You have to know which type of setup you have. Another good example, this is a super relevant one because it comes up a lot, is the convention committee. So if an intergroup appoints a chair of the convention committee. The chair of the convention committee is accountable to the intergroup, not to the members of the convention committee. Now, if they all think he's a numpty, shall we say, and there's a vote of no confidence and they get rid of him, they can't appoint someone new. It has to be the intergroup that appoints someone new. Yeah, they can nominate someone and then the intergroup approves the nomination. There are ways of keeping the peace there. But it's a very, very different chain of command than with district area conference. So the question is, with the two different types of subcommittee, two different types of committee. So that the layer forming committee is formed. Let's say you've got 15 groups in a town and they want to do public information work. The committee is formed to perform activities that the groups can't easily perform on their own. And so that's a way of joining groups together and then delegating work to the new committee. The other type is where you've got too many cooks spoiling the broth. And the person that got my hackles up a few weeks ago, she did a good job actually. She got my hackles up in about 4 different ways in the first 30 seconds of the chair. So, kudos to her. One of the other things she said was that AA is not democratic. I thought, oh, for heaven's sake, this is... it's not a perfect democracy. It's a quirky democracy, but there's democracy all the way through. And in my old home group, and actually my current home group, we've got a principle, which is that if you want to do service in the group, we will find service for you to do. So let's say tea making. There might be 4 people making tea and they alternate between themselves. There are spare tea makers. There's, third deputy sweeper. So if you want a job, we'll split roles, we'll find you a job, and then you get to vote in the group conscience. You get to be part of the group conscience meeting. And in doing this, we're enabling authority and responsibility to go hand in hand. If you want authority over the group, this is concept 10. If you want authority over the group, you have to take responsibility. We don't want any backseat drivers here. And it totally changes the jiggy of the meeting if everybody who wants to have a say is actually physically having to do some kind of service. I don't know why it changes the tone, but it changes the tone. Now, this is great until the group gets above 35 people. 35 people. Now, not everyone is going to turn up at business meetings. Not everyone is going to turn up at group consciences. But these are fundamentally different things. The business meeting is a fundamentally different beast than the group conscience meeting. So the group conscience meeting is where it's like conference. We'll discuss a few important questions of policy and finance, and then the General Service Board makes 10,000 decisions a year, ranging from the tiny to the extraordinary. And the group conscience versus the business meeting is like that. The group conscience is like the conference, and you can have really very large numbers of people in group consciences because you've got a very small number of questions. You don't necessarily have to have everyone sharing on everyone. You can have voting systems. There are ways of handling that. So when my groups have group consciences, maybe we'll choose 3 topics. That's all. You don't have to discuss everything because group consciences are about making major decisions. No one has that many major decisions. No group has that many major decisions. If you have that many major decisions, they're not major, or they're not necessary decisions. So you can cope with large numbers of people. But if you want to get operational stuff done, with hundreds of small decisions, the last thing you want is a room full of 30, 40, 50 people, all with their little hands waving in the air, desperate for their voices to be heard. I heard someone sharing in a meeting before she got to AA. She didn't have a voice, and now she's got to AA, she's found her voice. And this principle plays out in group conscience meetings. People will be heard. Whether or not it's been said before. In that meeting, by the way, where and I identify with what she said, to find your voice in AA, absolutely important. But there's an old Scottish woman who said, yes, I found my voice in AA. When I found it was a sledgehammer. So, group consciences versus business meetings. You can cope with large numbers of people in group conscience meetings because they're of a completely different nature. Business meetings need to be efficient as well as effective because what you have to get through in the business meeting ain't optional. You can't cut things out. If operational decisions need to be made, they need to be made. So you need to look at efficiency as well as effectiveness. And so a huge amount of delegation is required once a group gets big. And the delegation happens in two ways. Firstly, through concept 3, officers are given a huge amount of right of decision so that they can just get on with their jobs, and maybe if something goes wrong it gets picked up on in a business meeting, but you don't have everyone chipping in on exactly how the recycling officer, is the recycling officer going to use a hemp bag or a hessian bag? Is it going to be hung on a hook to the left of the kitchen, or maybe it's best inside the front door, or just leave the recycling officer to handle that. So there's delegation to the officers. There's delegation to subcommittees. I've had groups which have PI subcommittees so that they just decide everything amongst themselves, report back once a month. Any major questions are discussed then, but you're hiving the work off to the subcommittee. And I'll tell you a story about, so I sponsor a lot of people in Israel, and one group, I won't say which fellowship it's in, one group copied my home group in terms of giving everyone a say on in the group conscience meeting by having everyone do a commitment, except cultural difference between the UK and Israel. In my home groups in the UK, maybe once or twice a year, someone has a bright idea about how to change the group for the better. Usually everyone else sighs and you have to discuss it anyway, and maybe a change is made. But people just leave it be. This is not what happens halfway between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. You have a group of 50 people. Each person has 3 ideas a week about how the group needs to change to be improved, and lots of them will be really good ideas. And this poor group had a backlog of 6 months of ideas to discuss about how to improve the group. They were spending hours and hours every month having group conscience meetings. And a tiny bit of organization is required at this point. The solution was twofold. Firstly, to replicate what conference does, which is to sift through the 150, 200 questions for conference and say which ones are really important. And you have a little subcommittee maybe to sift through them and just make the brutal decision. We're going to discuss these 3. We're going to discard the other 120, try again next year. Thanks for sending in your suggestion. But the other thing is to not have the same composition for the group conscience meeting as you do for the business meeting. So to have a much smaller representative sample for the business meeting, maybe the main service commitments of the chair, the secretary, the treasurer, someone who's in charge of all of the venue related things, someone who's in charge of all of the refreshments related things, so that you can get business done quickly. And sometimes with those small committees, so for business meetings, to have maybe 5 or 6 people to handle those. If they're not trusted, the group can get rid of them. But it works much better in my experience than having 30 people involved in every single decision. What else is there to discuss on Tradition 9? So when you've got a committee, there's some very basic principles of how it operates. Sometimes with you get the most enthusiasm and therefore the most risk with convention committees, and it's important when I've been on convention committees or workshop committees or any committee which is doing some sort of event, and the same applies to other committees too, to always remember that you are directly accountable to the people that put you there in the first place. So you're there on the committee to serve people. You're not given a blank check to do your own thing. You're given under the concepts. It's impossible to talk about Tradition 9 without discussing the concepts. You're given a brief for the output. You may be given some guidelines about how to produce that output, but basically it's the attitude is thy will be done. So I remember when I was on the National Subcommittee for Armed Services, I disagreed with lots of the decisions that the board was making about some of the output of our committee, but they're the board, they're the ones that put us in place. Thy will be done. You have your little say, and either they change their mind or they don't, and then thy will be done. And that's how unity is maintained. If I really don't like it, I can leave, and I've left committees. It's fine. They find someone else. It's all right. So I choose my battles very, very carefully when I'm in a service role. And a few items on there's a connection between Tradition 9 and Concept 9, and it's to do with leadership. So on any committee, there are some. I always try and read this little list before I'm going into a committee meeting to think about these principles, which are straight from Concept 9, which is where Bill's leadership essay is. And the principles are these: number one, impartiality. So to try to remain as neutral as possible on every point. By nature, I'm someone who, whenever there is controversy, immediately works out which side of the barricades I'm going to, am I going to man the barricades or am I going to storm the barricades? To try to remain impartial. Peacekeeping. A former chair of London Region North said that your primary job as the chair of a region or an intergroup or a whatever is to keep the peace, keep it running, make sure it starts on time, ends on time, and you maintain the unity. If you lose the unity, you've lost everything. What else? Consultation. So consulting people who are affected, consulting neighbouring intergroups, consulting neighbouring regions. Responding constructively to criticism, which requires a lot of pausing. Very occasionally in AA, people say things without thinking. Sometimes people get very upset and feel that it's very important to express that upset now in case it goes cold and goes off. So you see the little red face in the front row and the huffing and the body all tense, and you know something's coming. And with whenever you're on a committee, whether it's intergroup, region, whatever, criticism is going to fly around the room. And it's a totally legitimate practice to say when criticism arises, I'm going to go and think about that and come back to you next time. I'm not going to respond to that straight away. I mean, apart from the fact it drives them crazy, so it's hugely enjoyable to say that. Um, it saves me from becoming part of the problem by, ding dong, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Um, One of my friends in AA says, however clean you keep your nose in AA, 1 in 7 people is just not going to like you. Um, if you speak, there are going to be people in the room where it just rubs them up the wrong way. And a few months ago, I made some contribution at a region meeting, and my whole tone and delivery, I mean, before you even get on to content, my tone and delivery annoys about 1 in 7 people. So if you're one of those 1 in 7, you're in pretty wide, broad company there. And clearly that something was happening on the front row in this region meeting, and a little hand shot up, and the chap um, said that he'd found what I'd said very offensive. Now, on the face of it, I had no clue why he was saying it. There was an extensive post-mortem examination. I mean, not a literal post-mortem examination. I didn't push him down the stairs or anything. But there was a post-mortem examination of what had happened. And, I think it was worked out. Basically, the chap had totally got the wrong end of the stick about the tone in which I was saying something. Um, But to cut a long story short, the reason I'm telling this story is because 27 years or was 26 at the time, 26 years of Al-Anon training enabled me, as I was standing at the front with the microphone, with him having a go and 3 other people in the front row nodding furiously, like at a Labour Party conference. When he said his piece, I heard it, I listened to it, and I said, okay. So when he said how offensive he thought I was, okay. And so if you don't know what to say, here are the Al-Anon responses that my friend Tom gave me. Yes, no, really, wow, okay. And the 6th one is thanks. I think I added a thanks and then said, are there any other comments or questions? And, you know, responding constructively to criticism. There are times where um, uh, you realize something has gone wrong and you deal with it and you apologize and you say, what can I do differently next time? How are we going to clean up the mess? On this occasion, I ran the situation past 6 or 7 neutral observers who were there, and all of them said, you've done nothing wrong. There's nothing to apologize for. But this peacekeeping thing, um, at the next region meeting, um, the chap in question, I got into the room and he was there, and he had a face on him like thunder. And I thought, this is tricky because I don't think that there's anything to apologize for, but he thinks there is. What am I going to do? And as happens sometimes at these meetings, when people arrive, they walk around the room. Not everyone does it. Maybe 1 in 5 people does it, but they walk around the room and they greet each one of the people. And so I walked around there. I said hello to each person and said something personal to each person. So I had like a proper conversation with each one. And I got to him and I clapped him on the shoulder and said, I'm glad to see you. Have you had a good week and are you looking forward to this and all that? And the problem was gone. Because behind most offence I found in service, it's not about the content. It's about the feeling that people have got it in for you. Remember that Kenneth Williams line, in for me, in for me. They've all got it in for me. And the way to make amends for that, it's on the flank. You can't tackle it head on because it's not about the content. It's about the belief that you're attacking the other person. If you remove the perception that there is any attack by demonstrating love, then 19 cases out of 20, the whole thing crumbles into nothing. There was nothing there in the first place, which is why responding on the level of content to overt criticism is rarely helpful. Because as soon as you respond in kind, you end up actually reinforcing the emotional dynamic, which is what caused the problem in the first place. So responding constructively to criticism, compromise. I think it's said later on in the concepts that most progress is made in AA through a series of unsatisfactory compromises. There was so I'm going to see if I can find this quotation because I've been misquoting it for years, and I think for once I ought to have the grace to quote it properly. Okay, so regarding his pastoral governance in Venice, Pope John the 13th wrote about the following rule coming from Gregory the Great, but also attributed to St. Bernard, that he as a young priest knew as a motto the Bishop of Bergamo, Giacomo Radini Tedeschi. So this is where it originally comes from. I'll say it in Latin, then in English. Omnia videre, multa dissimulare pauca corrigere, which means you see everything, you disregard most things, and you correct a little. You see everything, you disregard most things, and you correct a little. And so I think that's a good way to run a group. Change only what needs to be changed. Don't change 100 things every day. Just when something absolutely needs to be changed, because groups are very unstable by nature because of they have some unstable people in them. So of course the group is going to inherit that instability. So anything which promotes stability is good. So compromise, which means taking tough stands only when it's absolutely necessary. Rotating leadership. Now, this is a difficult thing. When you start a group, within 5 years, you kind of need to leave, in my view, because even if you hang around as like the old timer or the long timer, people still like something goes wrong. Everyone looks across at the old timers bench to see what they think about it, scrutinizing the facial expressions. It's so tiresome. If you're going to leave the kids to run it, you need to leave the kids to run it and not be peering over their shoulder. They've got your number. If they have a question, they can call. Leave them to it. I can't tell you how many problems I've seen over the years. And I finally let go of a couple of groups, and the groups had claw marks on them when I let go of them. Rotating leadership. And to rotate out fully, as I say, especially if you've been a significant influence in the group or you've been a founder of the group, to rotate out completely, you can't stay in the room because you're going to have trouble sitting on your hands as well, watching what happens. It can leave a very bad taste in the mouth. And I think it's important that this notion of the Jubilee or the sabbatical year, to if you've been heavily involved in leadership in AA as a trusted servant, but it's still with a lot of responsibility, to periodically step back entirely and just be another member of AA with no leadership responsibilities whatsoever. And then if someone has a question, they can call you, and they don't. That's the amazing thing. They don't. And it's amazing how they get on without you. Okay, occasionally there's a question. But to step back completely and allow the soil to refertilize itself. a lot of the trouble I see in the service structure is with people who've been in leadership roles for like 20 years or 25 years or 30 years, and they haven't had a period of 2 or 3 years back in the trenches, making tea, talking to newcomers, leading someone through a step four. Um, and there can be a tone of world weariness at region meetings or at conference where people just get tired of saying the same thing again and again and again and again and again for 20 years. So I'm a great fan. I've become a great fan of you rotate out and you stay out and you leave the kids to it. What else is there? Yeah, so a phrase which a friend of mine uses is the consultation of last resort. So you're the person, if you've got a lot of experience in service, you leave yourself to be the person that gets called when all else fails, just to keep it so that everyone if you don't, no one gets the chance to learn by experience how to actually do things. What else? So my job as a sponsor is to train other people to lead in AA, not to do the leading for them. And also there's a temptation there to try to run groups you're not even a member of by remote control through sponsees. It happens, and it happens subconsciously. You don't it occasionally consciously, but without meaning to, you can feel emotionally involved in the group that your sponsee is running and want to control its direction in some way. So it's super important that I stay out of any substantive discussions, that I stick to the principles in those situations. What else do we have here? There's lots of, I'm skipping down my notes. There's a lot I'm going to ignore because we haven't got a huge amount of time. I'm going to talk about, oh yes, so at group level, don't organize any more than necessary. I've mentioned before, sometimes people have wanted to have group consciences about the restaurant we go to after the meeting. Don't do it. It doesn't need to be organized, so don't organize it. Only organize that which must be organized, and uh, almost everything that does need to be organized can be organized by the officer. It doesn't need to be organized by the group. And if you don't like it, they'll rotate out. You can volunteer next time. And that's often the best way of handling something you don't like at a group. Just leave them to it and then volunteer when the role comes up. So the principle of tradition 9 in my life. So organize as much as necessary, but as little as possible. So the basis of my program, when it says in step 3 that we made a decision to turn our wills and our lives over to God, a huge amount is made of the wording. We made a decision. Oh, it's just a decision. You haven't actually done it. It's all right. You don't need to worry about step 3 and God. It's only a decision. Well, if you look at the intent behind step 3, the formulation of step 3 in early AA, I was in a meeting the other day where we were discussing a vision for you, and the third member of AA, Bill D, I think his name was, and it said on the third day, I mean, what a phrase to use. Talk about a loaded phrase, seriously. Anyway, minor point. On the third day, he gave his life to his creator. It doesn't say he made a decision to. No, he did it. So how do I do that on a daily basis? What is life but made up of days? So if I want to turn my life over, I have to turn my day over, which means I need a plan. Now, those of us who have come from uh, an alcoholic background, or there's a lot of addiction and weirdness in my family, and people are either addicts or weird on one side, or they're the Al-Anons on the other side. So I was trained by both. And if you've got, as my friend Karen puts it, an Al-Anon stripe running down your back, then you might have the tendency to be a tiny little bit over organized. And um, a friend of mine describes how what does the average alcoholic when planning the day. I'm sure you've had this. You've got a newcomer. You say, "Okay, boy, you need to plan the day. So sit down with your higher power and with a pen and a piece of paper, and you write down your plan for the day, and then send it through to me." And you wait with breath that can be described only as bated for what's going to come through. And then it's like this: 10 o'clock, get up; 11 o'clock, get dressed; 12 o'clock, make an onion sandwich; 1 o'clock, eat the onion sandwich; 2 o'clock, staring; 3 o'clock, cleaning cleaning up the plate; 4 o'clock, prepare to go to meeting; 7 o'clock, go to meeting; 11 o'clock, daily review. That's the plan. So that's the average alcoholic addict plan for the day. And that needs a little bit of fleshing out. That needs a little bit of work before it's good to go as a plan for the day. Your Al-Anon plan for the day, if you give you and this is basically if you got a newcomer and you want to test, okay, is this like 90% AA, 10% Al-Anon, or is this person like 37% AA and 63% Al-Anon? You give them this test. What's your plan for the day? And you give an Al-Anon a task, the job of doing a plan for the day. At least 2 of the rooms in the house are going to have to have been completely reorganized by lunchtime. And there's going to be a marching on a demonstration at 2, marching on another demonstration at 5 p.m. They're going to go to 3 meetings. They're going to read 7 books. They're just endless things to do. Impossible. So you need to know, which side of the fence are you on? Are you someone that needs to plan a little more, or nothing is going to happen except eating onion sandwiches and staring? Or are you someone I'm someone that needs to do the list for the day, cross off 3/4 of what is on the list because it's not going to get done, and otherwise I spend the whole day guilty. And I can see at least one person nodding. Um, I have I've been really bad at this before. I wake up in the morning guilty because I know that all the things I haven't yet written on the plan for the day, that most of them will not get done. I haven't even written the plan for the day, and already I'm guilty for not having done the things on the plan for the day I haven't yet written. And then you wonder why you're twitchy on a Sunday evening and exhausted on a Monday morning. The reason you're twitchy on a Sunday evening and exhausted on a Monday morning is because there's some taskmaster from 1973 buried in your brain that you know that you're going to disappoint. So, my view is now to have a much simpler plan and do one thing at a time. And to be much more flexible and adaptive to circumstances. To listen to I'm someone who, as an Al-Anon, even when I'm physically exhausted, if it's on the plan, it's got to get done. No, it doesn't got to get done. Very rarely does it got to get done. So to actually listen to I can't believe I'm saying this, listen to my own body. I have to listen to my own body. What is it telling me? You know, when you get cold sores, be careful of where you're putting your mouth. I mean, your body does not lie. It's it gives you really concrete information at times. Sometimes your body is the only way your spirit can get through to you because it's the one thing that ultimately you can't ignore. So I've had to listen to that to de-organize myself. Um, and that's all I've got to say on that, really. But there's a question here. If a person is not accountable to you, oh, I already know where this is coming from. If if a person is not accountable to you and they have been in a position of entrenched power for decades, is there a way to get rid of them? Hiking expedition in the Dolomites. That's the only way. A good topic at your local Al-Anon meeting is, where would you hide the body? Um, that's good for 2 sessions, by the way. Um, so one of the difficulties, with um, problems in AA is that I've experienced is that almost every problem stems from a failure of the structure to comply in some regard with the traditions and the concepts. So the answer is embedded in the question. There should be no one in any position of entrenched power. Um, Everyone should be disposable because it's principles, not personalities. The job of a job is to get the job done, not to keep someone in the post because you're loyal to the person. You need to be loyal to the discharge of the duties in question. There is material in the concepts, however, about employees, and we have employees in the UK, in Great Britain rather, we don't include Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland AA is already separated from GB and joined with the Republic of Ireland. Just so you need to know that. We have employees, and the question is, do you keep someone in the same role forever, or do you rotate people between roles? That's one of the big questions. And also, should jobs be in perpetuity? So with the London Telephone Office, generally people are in the role for around 10 to 15 years, which is a long time. General secretaries tend to be 10 to 15 years, maybe a little less. But their rotation happens only, it's not rotation by order. It's rotation simply because the people that are hired tend to be in their 50s or sometimes even 60s. So there's a natural point at which they just want to go and live in Devon. That's what you do. Your 68th birthday, through the post automatically comes a one-way train ticket to Tiverton Parkway. You have to move. And a trowel. They give you a trowel as well. You're supposed to, even if you know nothing about gardening, it's the law, you have to start gardening in Devon when you get to that age. Um, there are arguments on both sides, but honestly, corporations manage to have plenty of rotation. I used to work for one of the big accounting and tax law firms in London many years ago in my 20s. And they'd rotate partners between clients. So a partner would be a partner for a particular client for a few years, then they'd rotate on to the next one. There was constant rotation of the more junior staff. So in this day and age, particularly, it's perfectly possible to rotate staff without losing expertise. There are lots of ways of recording expertise and knowledge. There are ways of keeping the knowledge available without the person being formally in an entrenched role. So with most problems in AA, as I say, I think if you look at the strict reading of the traditions and the concepts and say, where does the structure not match the strict meaning and the clear intent behind the tradition and the concept, boom, there's your answer. But there's very rarely any willingness to bring the structure that exists in line with the principles. So, you usually have to whistle for that one. Any comment on corporate knowledge in AA? One of the principles behind leadership in AA is exploiting the natural or acquired abilities of the people who are volunteering for service. So it's a very important principle that everyone be given the opportunity to do service in AA at all sorts of different levels, and we support people who don't have particular experience or expertise to learn on the job to a certain extent. I mean, if you can learn in advance, even better, but to catch up on the job. But my personal view, and this is a controversial one maybe, that it's important to make the most out of what is in the room in terms of experience. If people have got useful experience, to use the useful experience. And that's a big book principle as well about, the world has furnished, God has furnished the world with practitioners and professionals and whatever of every sort. Let's make use of them. They're put there for a reason. And I think it's the same in AA. There's an awful lot of good experience people have from corporate or other workplace settings, which could be well deployed. I'm coming up to 11 o'clock, and I better wind up there. But just presuming there are no other comments, I'm going to stop the tape. And okay, so well, thank you for listening.